Eleanor Grayson sat on the edge of her creaky bed in the cramped Brooklyn apartment, the faded floral wallpaper peeling at the corners like the edges of her dreams. At 67, her hands, weathered by years of scrubbing floors and mending clothes, trembled slightly as she clutched a worn photograph. It was her, decades younger, smiling beside her mother, whose stern face seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. Eleanor's gray eyes traced the image, her heart heavy with the echo of her mother's voice. "No man will ever want you. Eleanor, you're too plain, too stubborn, too much." Those words had been a constant companion, a cruel refrain that followed her through the years. Her family, her mother, her aunts, her cousins had never hesitated to remind her of her supposed flaws. Her broad shoulders, her sharp tongue, her refusal to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. They'd called her unmarriageable, a burden, a woman destined to live alone. And for decades, Eleanor had believed them. She set the photograph down and stood, her knees protesting as she moved to the window. The Brooklyn street below buzzed with life taxi horns blaring, children laughing, couples strolling hand in hand. Eleanor envied their ease, their certainty of belonging. Her life had been one of survival, of proving herself against the tide of her family's disdain. She'd worked as a seamstress, a cleaner, a caregiver, jobs that kept her hands busy and her heart guarded. She'd never married, never had children, never dared to hope for more than the small, quiet life she'd carved out. But lately, something had shifted. It started with a letter, slipped under her door a month ago. The landlord, a mysterious figure who owned the entire building, was raising the rent. Her neighbors, a mix of young families and elderly tenants like herself, had been in a panic. The building was old, its pipes groaning and its paint chipping, but it was home. For Eleanor, it was more than that. It was the only place she'd ever felt a flicker of independence, away from her family's suffocating judgment. She'd seen the landlord's name on the lease, Vincent Caldwell. No one knew much about him, only that he was wealthy, reclusive, and uncompromising. The rumors swirled was a cold businessman, a man who cared only for profit. Eleanor didn't care about rumors. She cared about keeping her home. So she'd written him a letter, her handwriting steady despite her nerves, pleading for the tenants, for herself. She hadn't expected a response, but one came. A handwritten note, brief but polite, inviting her to meet him at a cafe on 7th Avenue. "I'd like to discuss your concerns in person," it read, signed with a flourish, Vincent Caldwell. Eleanor had stared at the note for hours, her heart pounding. Why her? Why now? She'd almost torn it up, convinced it was a mistake. But something, perhaps the stubborn streak her family had always criticized, urged her to go. The cafe was a small, cozy place, its windows fogged with steam from the espresso machine. Eleanor arrived early, her best scarf knotted neatly at her throat, her silver hair pulled into a bun. She sat by the window, watching the world pass by, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Vincent Caldwell walked in, she knew him immediately. He was tall, in his early 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to carry a lifetime of stories. He wore a tailored coat, but there was nothing ostentatious about him, just a quiet confidence that filled the room. "Ms. Grayson." His voice was warm, like a crackling fire. She nodded, suddenly aware of her worn coat, her sensible shoes. He sat across from her, his gaze steady but kind. "I read your letter. You have a way with words." Eleanor blinked. Caught off guard. I just wrote what I felt. The building gets home to so many of us. We can't afford the increase. Vincent leaned back, studying her. You wrote about the people. Their stories. The young couple with the newborn. The veteran who sits by the window every morning. You made them real to me. She flushed and used to praise. They're my neighbors. They matter. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I've owned that building for 30 years. I've never met the tenants. I leave that to managers. But your letter, it made me want to know more. They talked for hours about the building, the tenants, the city itself. Vincent listened intently, his questions thoughtful, his laughter genuine. Eleanor found herself speaking freely, her usual guardedness melting away. He wasn't what she'd expected, not cold, not distant. He was present. When they parted, he promised to reconsider the rent increase. I'll be in touch. MS. Grayson, he said, and she believed him. That night, she lay awake, her mind racing. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as the plain, stubborn woman her family had defined her as, but as someone with a voice, a purpose. She didn't know it yet, but that meeting was the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart, a wall that Vincent Caldwell, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, would slowly begin to dismantle. The days following Eleanor's meeting with Vincent were a blur of cautious hope. She hadn't told her neighbors about the cafe conversation. It felt too fragile, too personal to share. Instead, she busied herself with her routine, stitching hems for Mrs. Alvarez down the hall, delivering groceries to Mr. Thompson, the elderly veteran who rarely left his apartment. But every time she passed the mailbox, her heart skipped, half expecting another note from Vincent. Her family, though, was never far from her thoughts. They lived just a few blocks away, in a cramped house filled with the same furniture and the same bitterness she'd grown up with. Her cousins, now in their 50s, still dropped by occasionally, their visits laced with pitying glances and thinly veiled insults. Still alone, Eleanor, her cousin Marjorie, had asked last week, her tone dripping with false concern. You know, you could have moved in with us years ago. Saved yourself the trouble. Eleanor had smiled tightly, saying nothing. She'd learned long ago that arguing only fueled their narrative. They'd never understood her choice to live alone, to carve out a life on her own terms. To them, a woman without a husband was a failure, a life half-lived. Their words stung, but they no longer cut as deeply as they once had. Still, they lingered, a quiet poison in her mind. A week after the cafe meeting, another letter arrived. Vincent invited her to visit the building's rooftop, a space long locked and forgotten, to discuss future plans. Eleanor hesitated. The rooftop. It seemed an odd place for a landlord to meet a tenant. But curiosity and that stubborn streak won out. She climbed the creaky stairs, her breath catching as she pushed open the heavy door. The rooftop was a revelation. Overgrown with weeds and littered with rusted chairs, it still offered a breathtaking view of Brooklyn's skyline, the city lights glittering like a sea of stars. Vincent stood by the edge, his coat flapping in the evening breeze. He turned as she approached, his smile warm but tinged with something else, nervousness. Perhaps. MS. Grayson, he said, gesturing to the view. What do you think? It's beautiful, she admitted, her voice soft. I didn't know this was up here. Most don't. He glanced at her, his eyes crinkling. I used to come here years ago, when I first bought the building. It was my escape. They walked the rooftop, Vincent sharing stories of the building's history, tenants who'd come and gone, repairs that had shaped its character. Eleanor listened, captivated by his passion. He wasn't just a landlord. He cared about this place, its people. When he asked about her life, she hesitated, then spoke haltingly of her years as a seamstress, her love for books, her quiet dreams of seeing the world. She didn't mention her family's words, but they hung heavy in the air. Vincent seemed to sense it. "You've lived here 20 years," he said. "Yet I get the feeling you've kept yourself hidden." She looked away, her throat tight. "It's easier that way." He didn't push, but his silence was kind, inviting her to share more if she chose. They sat on a rickety bench, the city humming below, and talked until the sky darkened. When they parted, Vincent handed her a key. "For the rooftop," he said. "Come back anytime." Eleanor clutched the key all the way home, its weight grounding her. That night, she dreamed of open skies and a voice that didn't judge her, a voice that saw her as enough. The next morning, her cousin Marjorie called, her voice sharp. "Heard you're stirring up trouble with the landlord. Eleanor, don't embarrass yourself. Men like that don't care about people like you." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. For the first time, she didn't feel the familiar sting of shame. Instead, she felt a spark of defiance. "You don't know him," she said quietly, then hung up. She began visiting the rooftop daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Vincent. He'd bring coffee, she'd bring stories, and together they'd imagine ways to improve the Buildinga community garden, a library corner in the lobby. Eleanor felt herself unfolding, her guarded heart softening. Vincent was different. He listened without judgment, laughed at her dry humor, respected her opinions. He saw her not the caricature her family had painted, but the woman she'd always been. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Vincent turned to her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I'm not raising the rent. Your letter, your passionate reminded me why I bought this place. To give people a home, not take it away." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Don't thank me yet. I have another idea, one that involves you." Eleanor's heart raced. What was he planning? And why did the thought of it fill her with both fear and a strange, unfamiliar hope? Vincent's idea was bold, almost unthinkable. He wanted to transform the building, not just its physical spaces, but its spirit. A community hub, he called it. A place where tenants could connect, share, and thrive. And he wanted Eleanor to help lead it. "You know these people," he said, his voice earnest. "You understand what they need." Eleanor stared at him, the rooftop key heavy in her pocket. "I'm no leader, Vincent. I'm just me." "Exactly," he replied, his eyes steady. "That's why I trust you." The idea both thrilled and terrified her. She'd spent her life in the background, avoiding attention, shielding herself from her family's criticism. To step into the spotlight, to take on something so ambitious it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But Vincent's belief in her was a lifeline, pulling her toward courage she didn't know she had. They began meeting regularly, sketching plans over coffee and rooftop sunsets. A community room for classes, a garden for fresh vegetables, a book exchange for the children. Eleanor found herself speaking up, her ideas flowing freely. Vincent listened, his respect evident in every nod, every question. She wasn't used to Thisto being valued, to being heard. It was intoxicating. But her family's voices still lingered. One afternoon, her Aunt Clara visited, her eyes narrowing as Eleanor described the project. "You're too old for this nonsense," Clara said, her tone sharp. "You're embarrassing yourself, chasing after some rich man's whims." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "It's not about him. It's about the people here." Clara scoffed. "You've always been too stubborn. No wonder you're alone." The words hit like a slap, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She thought of Vincent's quiet encouragement, of the tenants who'd started thanking her for her efforts. "I'm not alone," she said softly, and for the first time, she believed it. As the weeks passed, Eleanor and Vincent grew closer. He shared pieces of his own story of childhood in a small town, a marriage that ended in loss, a life spent building wealth but searching for meaning. Eleanor opened up too, hesitantly at first, about her family's relentless criticism, the way their words had shaped her. Vincent listened without pity, only understanding. "You're not what they said you were," he told her one evening, his voice firm. "You're strong, Eleanor. Stronger than they'll ever know." Her throat tightened, but she managed a smile. "I'm starting to believe that." The project took shape. Eleanor organized meetings with the tenants, her voice steady as she shared Vincent's vision. To her surprise, they listened. Mrs. Alvarez offered to teach sewing classes. Mr. Thompson volunteered to share war stories with the children. The building buzzed with a new energy, a sense of possibility. Eleanor felt it to a spark she hadn't known in years. But doubt still crept in. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she'd stare at the ceiling, her family's words echoing. "No man will ever want you." Vincent was kind. Yes. But was it just pity? A rich man's amusement? She pushed the thoughts away, but they lingered, a shadow on her growing hope. One rainy afternoon, Vincent invited her to his office, a modest space above a bookstore. He showed her blueprints for the community room, his excitement contagious. As they pored over the plans, their hands brushed, and Eleanor froze, her heart racing. Vincent didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes soft but intense. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "I don't just want you for this project. I want you in my life." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eleanor's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, to let herself fall into this unexpected possibility. But fear decades of it held her back. "Vincent, I'm not what you think I am." He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I see you, Eleanor, and I want you exactly as you are." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. For the first time, she felt the weight of her family's words begin to lift, replaced by something new, something warm, something real. She didn't answer. Not yet. But as they sat there, hands entwined, she knew she was standing on the edge of something extraordinary. Eleanor's world felt like it was tilting. Vincent's words, "I want you in my life," echoed in her mind, both a promise and a challenge. She spent the next few days in a haze, torn between hope and fear. Could she trust this? Could she trust herself? At 67, she'd built a life around caution, around protecting her heart from the pain of rejection. But Vincent wasn't her family. He wasn't the world that had tried to define her. The community project gave her a distraction. The tenants were now fully invested, their excitement palpable. The community room was under construction, its walls already painted a warm yellow. Eleanor organized a schedule for classes: cooking, sewing, storytelling, and found herself at the center of it all. People smiled at her in the hallways, thanked her, asked her opinion. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. Vincent was there too, not as the distant landlord, but as a partner in the work. He rolled up his sleeves, helped move furniture, laughed with the children who ran through the lobby. Eleanor watched him, marveling at how easily he fit into this world she'd thought was hers alone. He caught her staring once, and his smile, warm, unguarded, made her heart stutter. But her family's shadow loomed. One evening, her cousin Marjorie showed up unannounced, her eyes gleaming with suspicion. "What's this I hear about you and the landlord?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You think you're some kind of heroine now, saving the building. He's using you, Eleanor. Men like that always do." Eleanor's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "You don't know him, Marjorie. And you don't know me." Marjorie laughed, a cruel sound. "Oh, I know you. Always chasing dreams you'll never catch. You're too old for this, Eleanor. You'll end up alone, just like we said." The words cut, but Eleanor didn't crumble. She thought of Vincent's hand in hers, of the tenant's gratitude, of the life she was building. "Maybe I was alone," she said quietly, "but I'm not anymore." Marjorie left, her parting glance full of disdain. But Eleanor felt a quiet victory. She wasn't the woman her family had tried to make her. Not anymore. The turning point came on a crisp autumn evening. Vincent invited her to dinner, not at the cafe, but at his apartment, a penthouse in the building she'd called home for 20 years. She hesitated, her old fears whispering, but she went. The apartment was warm, filled with books and soft lighting, not the sterile luxury she'd imagined. Vincent cooked simple pasta, a bottle of wine, and they talked as if they'd known each other forever. After dinner, they sat by the window, the city sprawling below. Vincent turned to her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I've been alone a long time. I didn't think I'd find someone who made me want to change that. But you make me want to live again." Her heart pounded. "Vincent, I'm not young. I'm not what people expect. My family, your family was wrong." He interrupted, his voice firm. "You're extraordinary. You're kind, fierce, brilliant. I don't care about your age or what anyone expects. I care about you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain. They were relief, joy, a release of decades of doubt. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but sure. "I want you in my life too." He smiled, and when he kissed her, it was gentle, like a promise kept. For the first time, Eleanor felt truly seen, truly wanted, not as a project, not as a tenant, but as a woman with a heart full of dreams. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The community hub opened to cheers and laughter, the tenants celebrating their shared victory. Eleanor stood beside Vincent, her hand in his, her heart full. Her family's voices still lingered, but they were quieter now, drowned out by the life she was building. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The community hub became the heart of the building, a place where laughter and stories filled the air. Eleanor was its quiet leader, organizing events, listening to tenants, making sure everyone felt included. Vincent was her partner in every sense, his presence steady and warm. They were a team, and though they hadn't spoken of marriage, their bond was undeniable. Eleanor felt like she was living a life she'd never dared to dream of. But her family wasn't done with her. One Sunday, her Aunt Clara and cousin Marjorie arrived, their faces tight with disapproval. They'd heard about the hub, about Vincent, about the way Eleanor had changed. "You're making a fool of yourself," Clara said, her voice cold. "Parading around with that man, thinking you're someone you're not." Eleanor stood tall, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not parading. I'm living. And I'm happy." Marjorie sneered. "Happy? With a man who's probably laughing at you behind your back. You're nothing. Eleanor, you've always been nothing." The words stung, but they didn't break her. She thought of Vincent's laughter, his hand in hers, the tenants who looked to her with respect. "You're wrong," she said simply, "and I'm done letting you define me." They left, their anger palpable, but Eleanor felt lighter than ever. She was free not just from their words, but from the weight of her own doubt. A few weeks later, Vincent invited her to the rooftop again. The space had been transformed, cleaned, repainted, with new benches and a small garden. The tenants had helped, a testament to the community they'd built together. Vincent stood by the edge, his expression nervous, a small box in his hand. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent my life building things, buildings, businesses, walls around my heart. But you've shown me what it means to live. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face, but she laughed through them, her heart soaring. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The proposal wasn't the end of their story, it was a beginning. They planned a small wedding, inviting the tenants who'd become their family. The ceremony was held in the community room, surrounded by laughter and love. Eleanor wore a simple dress, her silver hair glowing under the soft lights. Vincent looked at her like she was the only person in the world. But there was one more surprise. At the reception, Vincent took her hand and led her to the front of the room. "There's something you should know," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This building, this home we've all built together, it's yours now. Eleanor, I'm signing it over to you." The room erupted in cheers, but Eleanor could only stare at him, stunned. "Vincent, why?" "Because you made it a home," he said simply. "Not just for you, but for everyone here." She cried then, not from pain, but from a joy so deep it felt like it could carry her forever. Her family's words, "No man will ever want you," were nothing but a distant memory, drowned out by the love she'd found, the life she'd built. Eleanor and Vincent's marriage was a quiet revolution, a testament to the power of love found later in life. They didn't need grand gestures or lavish displays. Their love was in the everyday moments. The shared coffee on the rooftop, the laughter with tenants, the quiet evenings reading by the fire. The building, now officially in Eleanor's name, thrived under her care. The community hub grew, offering more classes, more connections, more hope. Her family stayed away, their silence a grudging acknowledgement of her triumph. Eleanor didn't need their approval anymore. She had Vincent, the tenants, and most importantly, herself. She'd spent decades believing she was less than, but now she knew her worth, and it was immeasurable. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop, Vincent took her hand. "You've changed me, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. I thought I'd live out my days alone. But you showed me there's always time for more. She smiled, her heart full. You showed me the same. They watched the city lights, the world stretching out before them. Eleanor thought of her younger self, the girl who'd believed she'd never be enough. She wished she could tell that girl that she was wrong, that love and purpose were waiting, that her story wasn't over. Years later, when Eleanor and Vincent were gone, the building stood as their legacy. The tenants told stories of the woman who'd fought for them, who'd loved fiercely, who'd proven that worth isn't defined by others' words. The rooftop garden bloomed, a symbol of resilience, of hope, of a life reclaimed. Eleanor Grayson had been told no man would ever want her. But the man she married didn't just want her, gave her a home, a community, and a love that silenced every doubt. And in doing so, she became more than she'd ever imagined, not just wanted, but needed, cherished, and unforgettable.